how to remove and install a transmission on a Versatile. These things were fantastically thought out and built really well, and it makes install and removal really easy. So we've already pulled the transmission out of this thing, and I'll kind of go over it quickly, show you what you need to do and what it's going to take, and then we will show you guys us dropping the transmission in back through here, and it goes through the cab. So we're gonna open the door and the transmission will go through and down. We're gonna use forks. You can get a rail set up from Versatile. I don't know, I doubt they make it anymore, but you could do that, and you can hang it on the roof and slide it in, but it works really well with a tractor. We'll hop up in here, and this is what it looks like with the transmission out. You have to pull your seat, you lift up your carpet, there's a plate on here, you unbolt that, take it off. You do have to remove your steering wheel so that you have room when the transmission comes up. But then from there, it's a fairly straightforward job. It just takes a bit of time to disconnect stuff. You got to disconnect your top drive shaft, your bottom drive shaft, your brake, all your linkages, your rear drive shaft, a few wires, like literally I'm talking maybe one wire, which is nice. And then I had to undo these hoses to get it out. So I'll undo them again to put it in. But it's really quite a simple process. There is a bracket on the side of the top of the transmission, and then there's 4 main bolts on the bottom holding it in. Here is the transmission for the Versatile. We got it rebuilt. There's a few little hydraulic lines you have to take off. This yoke, you can get it out of the cab with it off or with it on, but makes it easier. So I think I'm going to quickly pull this off. And then this, if you don't pull that yoke off, you have to take this off. And this is just a pipe plug to plug a fitting. So we'll get this thing ready to go on the Versatile. We're going up, boys. Yeah, we're going up, getting it in position. Definitely a little sketchy, but I don't know, it works. We have got the transmission in now. We've got the 4 bolts on the bottom done up. I'll show you that in a second. And then it's just routing electrical, routing the hoses, and then you put your driveline on. It's really a pretty simple task. I would recommend when you're in here, change your bushings on all your shifter linkages. That's an important thing to do. So the game plan on here is we're gonna button up as many hydraulic lines, electrical fittings, all that sort of stuff that we can. And then we're gonna do the drive line. So there's 3 drive shafts and U-joints that we're changing and doing. And then after that's all done, then we put the floor on, because it's way easier to have access from the top and the bottom when you're doing all this stuff. These are our main bolts on the bottom. So we got those put in. There's also a bracket that goes on the side over there. You can see there's that plate that it bolts to. We'll put that on relatively close to the end so that we can get all the stuff buttoned up around it without having that in the way. Okay, we've hooked up most things now on the top. That's easy to get to, and I'm kind of working through it a bit. I think now we're gonna throw in our rear U-joint get everything back here buttoned up, and then move to the front where there's the most going on. We were gonna save the U-joints, but then once I started cleaning them up, they've all got some needle marks on them. So 3 new U-joints, because that's what happens to hook up to the transmission, and we should be good to go. That U-joint went together very nicely. I'm very happy with that. And now we're gonna come in here. We're gonna do another U-joint since that one went so nicely. We're gonna do this top one because we're kind of working our way down now, because I've done most of the stuff I can on the top. We'll do this top drive shaft, and then we'll start from the bottom and then keep working down. But now it's getting too deep in there to do stuff from the top. We quickly just cleaned up the yokes here with some solvent, and now I slid the drive shaft forward so that we can work on putting the U-joint in easier. But one thing you want to keep in mind is where your grease fittings are facing. So when you're putting U-joints together, just keep that in mind and face them the way that you want them to so that it's easier to grease. This has been the most relaxing part of the job. I can just sit on the transmission here and work on my U-joint. So we got this one installed here. Now we'll slide it back in. Gonna pivot this that way, and should be quite easy to put that U-joint in now. Well, like every other project I do, it wasn't as smooth as I thought it was. So it turns out you have to have all the caps off and the U-joint in position, because you can't collapse that drive shaft enough to get it in there with the other caps on. But now we got it on, and I just put the clutch in and used this bar to spin the drive shaft a bit so I can get the bolts on my bottom cap. And we'll be done this in a minute. We are at the worst part now. We're underneath here dealing with it, and this kind of just sucks because of this massive brake. But we'll get that put on there, and then we have to connect the hydraulic line, this bracket here, and then once that's all connected in the U-joint, we just have to rebushing these linkages on the transmission. That was a royal pain, but we got it all in place and routed properly. I put that drive shaft on up there, and I didn't realize that the brake line had to go over, so we had to lift this up and over. But now we got it all routed properly. Next thing we're gonna do, which all these Versatiles need, is we are gonna do new bushings on all the shifter linkages that go in here, because they all wear out, and then you start hitting gears and putting 2 in at once, and it's just a pain. So there is 4 bushings up there, because there's 2 on either side, and then there's 6 down here, and then another 4 up there on these. So these 3 rods all need new bushings. These are what they look like. They're half circles because one goes on either side. Here's your part number for it, and that will clean up a lot of the slop that you have in your shifter, and they just go right in there. Starting up here, we got our cotter pin out, and now we take our washer off, and then we'll slip, get this linkage out if it'll come. There we go. And here's one bushing, a little stuck in there. And they're pretty cheap, so that's why we're just changing all of them regardless of how they look right now, because we're in here. It's been coming along well. We've got everything buttoned up along the edges, and we've got a disc brake put on with this bracket, so we're ready to put the last U-joint on. And then the only thing left is that big bracket that connects the top of the transmission to the frame. My issue now is, though, I lined up the U-joints front to back, so everything's lined up in series the way it should be, but now this U-joint don't line up. So I'm guessing this was 1 bolt off when it was put together last time, and now I'm gonna have to figure out how to spin one of these front wheels to get this to line up. That is amazingly difficult to get in there. They don't give you any extra room on here, so you have to have this yoke in here first, then have this kind of angled like that over the top, and while you're spinning it, you get this bottom one in, and then the top one comes in. I almost thought we were gonna have to start taking more stuff apart, but we were able to get it together. That is by far the hardest U-joint, because they just don't give you any extra space on this shaft. The last job that I need to do in there before I start buttoning up the cab is put this plate on. So this plate is our big transmission brace on the top, bolts up to here and then down there. So that one shouldn't be too bad as long as the transmission isn't a little kiltered over, but I think it'll go in pretty smoothly. We got those top bolts started. I'm pretty confident that the battery cables all run above that. So that's how I have it set up. And then once we get these ones tightened down a bit, we'll get those back ones in. They're not as easy to do because you have to do them from the bottom. But, well, or from the side, but it's coming along. No matter what I did, even if I put a pry bar through this bracket, because there's a hole there, and pried up, I couldn't get those bottom bolts in the back there to line up. So I went underneath, loosened the bolts there so the transmission could rock. Now I will get the bolts in here snug, and then I'll go underneath, tighten those ones up, and then come back up here and finish tightening these. Everything underneath there is buttoned up, but before I close the cab, because there's a lot of light coming through, I wanted to address the brakes because I had to unhook the brake line. So we have to bleed them. I'm sure it's a good time for some new fluid. So we opened up the top of the dash here and see what we can find for fluid. And try and get this thing open. There we go. Because I'm sure it's empty. Oh, bone dry. Beautiful. Let's put some new fluid in there. Before we get too fancy with our bleeding or anything, we're just gonna crack open this fitting. There's enough gravity here that hopefully we can get some flow happening and then bleed it the rest of the way later. I was having an issue trying to bleed brakes. I wasn't getting any fluid through it. I was going crazy, but then I started cleaning it out. Someone filled them up with grease thinking it's a grease zerk and not a bleed valve, so we'll have to get that cleaned out and then back to bleeding them. Bleeding brakes, these vacuum pumps are a fantastic thing. You just pull a vacuum on it and one person job, and we're getting all the air out the best you ever could. Finally, we're done down there, so now we're going to start putting the cab together. I'm going to put the steering wheel on and close up that, and then I'll start putting the floor in and the seat and remount the electrical. I jumped ahead and saved you the boring stuff. We got the floor in, the seat in, steering wheel on, all that. We're just about ready to fire it up. We are going to check and make sure our transmission oil level is good, which in fact I know it isn't because I had the dipstick off, so we're gonna have to fill that up and then we can fire it up. We're gonna put it in the shop, melt it down, clean it off, take it to the car wash, and it'll be ready to go to the season. We are adding hydraulic oil now to the transmission, and it's a real son of a gun. That dipstick tube's way in there, but we're gonna throw in 16 liters and see where it's at from there. Well, I threw the battery charger on the back there and we plugged it in. So now I'm gonna take lunch and start working on the Volvo, and in a couple hours we'll try it again. It fired up. We got transmission pressure, so should be all good. We're gonna move this thing forward, check it out, and then I need it right away to pull out a semi. Well, it works good. So there you go. That is the transmission installation process. If you want to remove it, just do it backwards. And it's really not too bad a job. We went through every gear. Seems to work well. The brakes are dragging though a little bit, and I think the e-brake might need to be adjusted a bit. So that's all we have to look at now, but we're gonna call that a wrap.